at my reference, I have an idea that I think that the shape of my environment is roughly correct. But if you look at this, these pews don't take up an even third of this. Like, so the middle section is smaller than the individual pews. So again, I'm using the principle that essentially I want to be working with either a full, which is 4x4, a double, which is 8x8, or a half, which is 2x2. And you can, in some cases, essentially combine those together. So you can make a full plus a half, which would be equivalent to 1.5, or you can make a double plus a full, which is essentially like a 3 times. So in this case, I'm pretty sure that the scale that I need for these pews is 1.5 my traditional grid setup. So I'm going to quickly make an asset that matches that criteria. So I'm going to turn off the snapping real quick, just so that I can drag out freely and then I can type in the values. So I'm going to drag something that looks kind of close to the size I want it to be. And so for the height of the pew, right now I'm going to make the assumption that the height of that pew is 1, which is 1 meter tall. And that should be a pretty good gauge. If I need to adjust it, I can adjust it later. Now the length, that's probably not accurate. So I'm actually probably looking at a 1 unit length as well. And then what we need to look at is the width. Because right now this width is 4, and remember we looked in our reference and that didn't seem like that was going to be big enough. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a 6. So it's going to be a 6 width. Now, this is something that I'm going to use for a second to determine what the shape of this asset is going to be, but I may not exactly use this box. But because I want to work with this, I'm going to actually isolate this asset in Maya. The easiest way to handle that would be to just Control H everything that you're not working with. But 3ds Max has an option to isolate. So I can right-click and select Isolate Selection. And then I basically just want to turn this into something that roughly approximates the pew. So I'm going to turn it into an editable poly. And in this case, I think I can pretty easily make a pew out of this. So I'm going to make a few indentations in it. And again, I'm not focusing on major details at the moment. I'm just focusing on a block in. So I'm going to go ahead and select the span here. I'm going to do a connect. This is actually the same in the modeling toolkit in Maya. So I'm going to have 2 options for the connect. And I'm going to go and make a pinch of largely to the corners here. Now, I have a tendency to want to make things chunkier than they should be instead of making them not chunky enough. Because ultimately, when you're doing a block in, it's better to err on the side of making something slightly blockier than not blocky enough. So I'm going to make another connect. This time I'm only going to use 1. And I'm going to slide it to the back because this is basically going to make the back of the pew. So then I'm going to go ahead, confirm that. Then I'm going to make one more cut along the midsection. And this one is roughly going to be just in the middle, directly in the middle. So I can get rid of, oops, I can get rid of my pinch and slide values. Actually, pinch doesn't do anything in this case, so it's fine. Okay. And so what I'm going to do here now, I want to make a couple of small edits here. So first of all, I'm not super worried about what this piece looks like on a broad scale. Again, this is a block in. So all I really want to do, I'm going to grab these two inset pieces, and I'm going to delete them. Then I'm going to grab one of these edges here. So I'm going to select edge. And you could extrude. In this case, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag. And you can actually do that while holding the vertex snap. And you can snap it, if you turn on the snaps, you can snap it to a vert that way. But you just have to be careful. I'm going to actually also, this is one thing that Maya defaults to automatically, but I'm going to enable axis constraints so that way I can drag the z-axis and drag it towards one of these verts here, and it will only snap it on the z-axis. It won't snap it on any of the other axes. And then I'm going to grab the, in this case, the y-axis, hold down Shift. Oops. And I'm going to drag out another extrusion here. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on the side panels. And I think that I'm probably going to want the back to be taller than the actual top here. So I know that the back is going to be at roughly 1. So I'm going to extrude this ever so slightly, just so I have it here. Then I'm going to actually going to switch into the side view. And I'm going to grab all the verts on the underside of what I just created. And I'm going to basically slide them down. And you hit Alt-W on Max to jump between viewports, or in Maya you hit the spacebar. Okay, so I have a very, very rough shape for this pew right now. That's really not terrible. We could do something that's a little more extreme than this. But I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to start populating this. I'm going to call this pew so that I have it. Then I end my isolation. So I have my different pew asset here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out from here where it is I want this to be placed. So what's cool is that once I get it roughly in a position that I want it to be, now this is one of those rules that that I used before, which is that if you have assets that are not meant to tile together, you don't want to have the snap to be anything other than the center and at the grounding of the object. So we could, if we wanted to snap several pews together, put the snap at the end, at the far corner. In this case, I actually don't think that's especially really super necessary. So, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to snap it up so that it's against the floor. And I'm going to slide this so that it's roughly where I want it to be. In this case, I kind of want it to be like slightly in front of the pillar. And I can already see a problem that I'm going to have with this. So I think I made a little bit of an error here in judging the size of this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out a copy, and you'll probably see what it is that I'm talking about. I'm going to make sure it's an instance. Okay. Yeah, and so what we're looking at here is that actually by making it 6, I clearly didn't do my math properly in my head, because that's the entire length of the hall. So what that means is if we want to make this so that the hole here is narrower, but we still have the right, we have roughly a good scale here. We can actually go and make an adjustment to the scale on this asset, or we could actually just move the verts. And I think that I'd actually rather move the verts. So let me get an idea of what size I want it to be. So we might want to just remove 1 meter from each of these so that there's a 2 meter gap. But I kind of want to see what it looks like if I make this a 4 meter piece. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all these verts, switch to the move tool, and I'm going to move these verts forward on X. So what I want is, let's see, I'm going to move them if you right-click on the Move tool in Max, you can get an offset world. Now, there's a tool set that allows you to type in values for the same kind of thing in Maya. It's just at the very top. It looks like just an XYZ, and it gets you to, you can either type an absolute or an offset in the same way. So what I want to do is I actually want to offset this by 1 meter. So I'm just going to type in 1 in X. I'm going to slide it over that way. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, except I'm going to do negative. So I'm going to type in -1. Okay. And okay. So right on. All right, and then because I edited the verts, all of my instances will share that change. So let me go ahead and actually slide this back a little bit. And actually, what I think, to be honest, these pieces actually work fine as 4 by 1 by 1, basically. So I learned by experimenting with this that actually the 4-unit size is probably the best size. And that's one of the things that you'll notice the more that you do this stuff, is that almost every time you think that you want to go off of your grid, you're going to end up finding that it's actually suboptimal to do so. So let's see here. Now what I want to do is I want to start dragging out copies. And there's a few ways I can handle that. One of them is I make sure that I snap it at the proper grid snapping so that I'm comfortable with it. One of the things that might be worth noting here is because these pieces are going to have a little bit of a uniform spacing, I might actually want to move my pivot to the back, so it's kind of the middle back section. So I'm going to go to Effect Pivot, hit Z or F to focus on the model. I'm going to slide the pivot to the back, and I'm going to snap it into the back piece here. And then that way I can snap this directly straight up against my my modules, and I can make sure that I'm doing some uniform stuff. Oops. As far as placing this. So now the only thing that's worth noting is that although this is not the case in other asset packages, if you affect the pivot of an individual object in your 3D package, you're going to have to affect the pivot separately for each of your instances. But again, this is a block-in, so it's not a big deal. So I'm going to turn off snapping for a second, and I'm just going to slide these out so that they aren't intersecting my column, so that they're just like barely there. And that will actually kind of compensate for that issue that I was having about the area between the pews being narrower. So that'll be fine. So what we need to do now is we need to figure out what the distance is between each of these pews. Like how far we actually want them to be from each other. So I'm going to go ahead and slide a pew forward. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. That's fine. So my guess here, and I think this is probably going to be correct, my guess is because these are 4 units in size, I'm going to need to slide these forward by 2 units. So we're going to have a pew every 2 units. And so for that, I want to adjust my grid so that I'm going through and moving them I could actually just do every 2 units. And I'm actually going to delete these really quick because I don't need them. And I'm going to turn off vertex snapping. So if you are in 3ds Max, this is largely how you handle snapping. But in Maya, you can toggle snapping on and off by holding down the X key on the keyboard, which actually does something completely different here. But yeah, so the X key will toggle your grid snap on and off, and the V key toggles your vertex snap on and off. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag. Oh, I got to make sure I have my snapping on. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag, and I'm moving it to the next 2. And I'm going to make a few copies of this. Now, in Maya, you can actually do this too. It's called a duplicate special, and you can just type in the offset for it. So I'm going to go ahead and I know that I'm going to need at least 15. So 15 plus the ones that I have at the start are 16. So I'm going to go ahead and click those. And actually, that was more than I needed. So I need to delete these last 3. So I would have been fine with if I'd done 12 instead of 15. But okay. So then, all right, I've got my pews there. And now, normally I wouldn't start with an asset like that so quick, but I wanted to go ahead and get you an idea of like what this is going to look like. So okay, the last thing I want to do before I wrap up this session is I want to drop in a camera that I can use to easily reference that shot that I have from my concept. So I've got this shot here, and I want to make sure that I have something that is giving me a good way of jumping back in to look at that without constantly having to move my camera back into position to do so. And that'll wrap up this chunk of the lesson, and then I'll come back in with the next lesson, and we'll cover it more thoroughly. So okay, at the moment, what I need to do is go and create a camera. So in Maya, you can just go to Create Camera, but in 3ds Max, you want to go to the Create tab. You want to find Cameras, and I'm just going to create a free camera. And I'm just going to click, and it'll create a camera where I want it to be. So then if you want to look through a camera, you can go to the perspective cameras, in this case camera 1. And then you can adjust the movement of the camera with the options here at the bottom. So I think, let me see. I'm going to switch to the orbit camera. Yeah, there we go. All right, so this is a little disorienting at first, so I think I might actually want to okay, so then I have my camera roughly in place. And then if I switch from my cameras, I can go from camera to perspective. And then that'll show me my camera is here, and I can adjust it as I go. And then I can also type in values for rotation. So like, for example, the Y is a little bit weirdly rotated here. And I kind of want to make the X 90 degrees. But I can also manually move it. So for example, I want it to be a little bit lower and looking up a bit. And then if I switch back to my camera, then I have a view of what that camera is supposed to look like, and at any point I can go back to that. Now that basically works exactly the same way as in Maya, so I highly recommend